I did not know the grave had been waiting for me longer than I had been alive. Every Sunday morning before Boston fully woke up, I took the Red Line to Harvard Square, walked 12 minutes through streets washed clean by rain, and carried white lilies to Mount Auburn Cemetery like a promise my heart remembered even when my mind did not. That November morning the air was cold enough to turn every breath pale. Wet yellow leaves clung to the black iron fence. Water gathered in the carved letters of old stones. The whole cemetery smelled like rain, earth, and flowers left behind by people who still had someone to miss. I wore my gray wool coat, the one with the loose button at the wrist, and kept both hands wrapped around the lilies because the wind kept trying to steal them from me. I was 27 years old, a third-grade teacher with chalk dust in the cuffs of my sleeves and unpaid bills folded neatly in my kitchen drawer. But at that grave I always became someone younger. Someone quieter. Someone still waiting for answers from a woman who could no longer give them. Eleanor Whitaker. Beloved mother. Keeper of light. The words on the stone were simple. Too simple for the woman who had raised me, packed my lunches, checked my spelling homework, taught me how to make chicken soup with too much time, and died with one secret still locked behind her tired blue eyes. I knelt on the damp grass and brushed the leaves from the base of the headstone. My knees soaked through my jeans immediately, but I barely noticed. Some grief becomes routine. Not smaller. Just familiar. I placed the lilies where the stone curved inward and touched my fingers to Eleanor's name. I came back, Mom, I whispered. Like I promised. The cemetery answered with rain ticking softly through bare branches. I tried to smile, but it broke before it reached my mouth. My students made paper turkeys this week. Jacob glued feathers to his sleeve and told me he was evolving. You would have loved him. I laughed once and the sound disappeared into the cold. Talking to the dead is strange only until the living stop listening. Then it becomes survival. I reached into my coat pocket and pulled out the folded handkerchief Eleanor had left me in the wooden box under her bed. White linen yellowed with age, soft from years of careful keeping. In one corner, stitched in dark blue thread, were the initials M. Moretti. I had never understood them. Eleanor had never explained them. She only told me when I was 16 and too angry to accept half answers, that some names were dangerous because people used them like keys to doors better left closed. I used to think she meant old pain. Family pain. The kind adults carried in silence because speaking it would make the walls shake. I set the handkerchief beside the flowers and bowed my head. I still do not know why you left me with her name, I said. Or his. Or whoever M. Moretti was supposed to be. A branch cracked somewhere behind me. Not loud. Not dramatic. Just enough to make my spine straighten before I turned. At first I saw only the cypress trees, black and narrow against the gray sky. Then the shape of a man stepped out from between them. Tall. Still. Dressed in a dark overcoat that made the morning seem even colder. He was maybe in his mid-30s, with black hair combed back from a face too controlled to be comforting and eyes the color of storm clouds over the harbor. He did not look like someone visiting grief. He looked like someone guarding it. My hand closed around the edge of the handkerchief. Can I help you? I asked, proud of how steady my voice sounded. The man's gaze moved from my face to the grave, then to the initials beneath my fingers. Something changed in him so quickly I almost missed it. A small break in all that control. Recognition. Anger. Maybe pain. When he spoke, his voice was low, polished, and cold enough to make the rain feel warmer. Who are you? He asked. And why are you calling Eleanor Whitaker your mother? For one second I thought I had misheard him, because grief makes strange things happen in quiet places. It turns wind into voices. It turns shadows into people you used to love. But this man was real. Too real. Rain gathered on the shoulders of his dark coat without softening him. His eyes stayed fixed on me with the kind of control that felt less like patience, and more like a locked door. I stood slowly, keeping the handkerchief in my hand and the grave at my back, as if Eleanor could still protect me from whatever had just stepped out of the trees. Because she was my mother, I said. His jaw tightened. Eleanor Whitaker had no children. The words hit harder than they should have. Not because I believed him. Because he said them like a fact carved in stone. Like my whole life was a clerical error he had come to correct. She raised me from the time I was a baby, I said. That is usually what people mean by mother. His eyes flickered, not enough to be warmth, but enough to prove he had heard the edge in my voice. What is your name? You first. A faint movement crossed his face. Surprise, maybe. Men like him were probably not used to being refused basic answers in cemeteries. Adrian Moretti. The name moved through the air between us like a church bell rung underwater. Moretti. My fingers closed tighter around the embroidered initials. Moretti. The ground seemed to tilt a little beneath my wet shoes. Then this belongs to your family, I said, lifting the handkerchief slightly. Adrian's gaze dropped to it, and for the first time, something human broke through the marble of his expression. Pain. Fast, furious, gone almost immediately. Where did you get that? I told you. Eleanor left it to me. She had no right to keep it. The cold certainty in his voice made anger rise in me, bright and protective. You do not know what she had a right to do. I know exactly what she did. Then you know more than I do. The truth of that sentence emptied some of the fight from me. Rain slipped down my neck. My knees were damp. The lilies beside Eleanor's stone looked almost too white against the gray morning. Adrian looked at the grave again, and hatred moved across his face so quietly it frightened me more than shouting would have. She took something from my family. I stepped in front of the headstone before I could think better of it. Do not talk about her like that. His eyes returned to mine. You are defending a woman whose story you do not know. And you are accusing a woman who cannot answer you. Silence. Fell. Not peaceful silence. The kind that waits to see which person will become cruel first. I expected him to demand the handkerchief. To step closer. To use his size, his name, his money, whatever power made men stand so still and expect the world to move around them. Instead he stayed where he was. You come here every Sunday, he said. My breath caught. How would you know that? The answer was in his eyes before he spoke. Because I have seen you. A cold line moved down my spine. The cemetery suddenly felt too open, too empty, every tree a witness that had chosen not to speak. You have been watching me? For 3 weeks. That is not an explanation. No, at least he did not insult me with a lie. It is the truth. I folded the handkerchief into my palm and backed up 1 step. Stay away from me. I cannot. You absolutely can. Not until I know why Eleanor Whitaker had my mother's handkerchief. His mother. The word struck something hidden. Moretti. Not just initials. A woman. A dead one, judging by the look he wore when he said it. I looked at the linen again, suddenly afraid of how fragile it felt. What was her name? His face closed. Mariana. The name came out soft despite him. Mariana Moretti. It sounded old and beautiful and dangerous. I almost repeated it, but something stopped me. Maybe Eleanor's warning. Some names were keys. Some doors were better left closed. I slipped the handkerchief back into my coat pocket. I am sorry for your loss, I said, because I was a teacher, because I was Eleanor's daughter, because manners sometimes survived even when fear did not. But whatever happened between your family and mine, I do not have the answers you want. Then find them. I stared at him. Excuse me. Eleanor left you that. She left you something else too. You do not know that. Women like Eleanor do not keep one secret for 27 years and leave only a piece of cloth behind. My mouth went dry. 27 years. My age. The number landed with too much precision. I hated that he saw me notice. His voice lowered. Ask yourself why she never told you where you came from. The words cut clean because they found an old wound. Already open. I had asked Eleanor that question 100 times growing up. She had always kissed my forehead and said, "You came to me when you needed me, and that was enough." It had been enough when I was 7. Less enough at 16. Painfully less now. I picked up the lily's torn paper wrapper and forced my hands to move. I have a class to prepare for tomorrow. Grace. Hearing my name in his voice made me freeze. I never told you my name. Adrian looked toward the path behind him, where a black car waited beyond the cemetery gate, barely visible through the rain. I know. Fear should have been the only thing I felt then. But beneath it was something worse. Recognition. Not of him, but of the shape of my life changing before I had agreed to it. I turned away from Adrian Moretti and walked toward the cemetery path, every step careful, every breath measured, Eleanor's handkerchief burning in my pocket like a question with teeth. I did not look back until I reached the gate. He was still standing by the grave, dark and unmoving beneath the cypress trees, staring down at Eleanor's name like the dead had finally started speaking. I told myself I would not look back because looking back would turn a stranger into a problem I did not have the space to carry, but even as I walked through the cemetery gate, I could feel him still there, as if distance meant nothing to a man who had spent too long learning how to watch without being seen. The iron gate closed behind me with a soft sound that felt louder than it should have been, and I stood for a moment on the sidewalk outside Mount Auburn Cemetery, holding my coat tighter around my shoulders while rain gathered in my hair. The handkerchief in my pocket felt heavier than linen should, as if it had absorbed not just history but intention. I started walking toward the train station, telling myself that whatever had just happened was not something I needed to understand, but my body did not fully agree. Every few steps, I felt the instinct to turn around again, to confirm that the man in the trees was not following, even though I refused to give him that power. By the time I reached Harvard Square, my shoes were wet through and my thoughts were no drier. I taught my morning class that Monday like nothing had changed, because children notice everything except what you tell them directly. I wrote spelling words on the whiteboard, helped small hands form letters, and smiled at stories about lost teeth and imaginary dragons. But every time the classroom door opened, I felt a fraction of my attention slip toward it. By lunchtime, I had already checked the hallway 3 times without knowing why. That was when I saw him. Not inside the school, not close enough to cause alarm, but across the street near the iron fence that separated the playground from the road. A black car was parked too neatly at the curb, engine off, too still to be casual. And beside it, standing as if he belonged to neither the street nor the school, was Adrian Moretti. He was not looking at me directly. He was looking at the building, at the windows, at the rhythm of my life that I had always assumed was invisible. My breath caught so sharply I had to turn away before any of the children noticed. When I looked again, he was still there. Watching. Not moving. Not hiding. Just waiting. After school, I stayed later than usual, pretending to organize papers that did not need organizing, because I did not know what I was supposed to do with the fact that a man from a cemetery had found my classroom. When I finally stepped outside, the air had cooled again and the street was quieter, as if the city itself was holding its breath. Adrian was no longer across the street. He was closer now, standing at the edge of the sidewalk, far enough not to block my path but close enough that I had no way of pretending I had not seen him. "You followed me," I said before I could stop myself. His expression did not change. "You live near children," he said. "That is not an answer. It is a reason." I tightened my grip on my bag. "I am a teacher. Not a mystery to solve." His eyes moved briefly to the building behind me, where the last few students were being picked up by parents, where life continued as if nothing strange had entered its orbit. "You are both," he said quietly. I felt anger rise, clean and immediate. "You do not get to decide what I am." "No," he said. "But I can decide what I am looking at." The simplicity of that answer unsettled me more than an argument would have. There was no threat in his tone, no urgency, only a steady certainty that made it clear he had already chosen to remain part of my surroundings whether I agreed or not. I stepped closer to the curb, putting space between us. "Why are you really here?" I asked. For a moment, he did not answer, and in that silence I saw something I had not seen at the cemetery. Not anger, not suspicion, something closer to uncertainty, carefully contained. "Because you carry something that belongs to my past," he said finally. My hand moved instinctively to my pocket, where the folded handkerchief waited like a sealed sentence. "This is not your past," I said. "It is mine." His gaze lowered slightly, not to the object itself, but to the place where it rested against my hand. "Then we have a problem," he said, and for the first time, I understood that whatever this was, it had already moved beyond coincidence, beyond curiosity, into something neither of us had agreed to begin. I did not expect him to still be there when I stepped out of the school gate again, but Adrian Moretti had the kind of patience that did not feel like waiting so much as persistence shaped into a person. He stood a few feet from the curb, hands in the pockets of his dark coat, eyes fixed not on the building this time but on me. The late afternoon light had shifted into a colder tone, stretching shadows across the sidewalk like thin cracks in glass. Children's laughter faded behind me as parents guided them toward parked cars, backpacks bouncing, ordinary life continuing as if nothing had entered it. I tightened my grip on my bag and walked forward anyway, because stopping felt like giving him permission to define the moment. "You are still here," I said. "Yes. That is not normal behavior. Neither is visiting a grave every Sunday for a woman who is not your mother." His response was calm, immediate, and unfairly precise. I stopped walking. The wind picked up, carrying the faint smell of wet asphalt and distant exhaust. "Do not turn my life into a question you get to investigate," I said. Adrian's gaze did not move away. "I am not investigating your life," he said. "I am trying to understand it. There is a difference." "Yes." The certainty in his voice made me uneasy, because it suggested he believed that difference mattered more than my comfort. I adjusted the strap of my bag, forcing my feet to stay planted on the sidewalk instead of stepping back. "You said there is a problem," I reminded him. "What problem?" He paused, and for the first time since I met him, I saw hesitation break through his control. It was brief, almost invisible, but it changed the air between us. "That handkerchief," he said. My hand moved instinctively to my pocket again. "It belonged to your family," I said. "Yes." "Then take it." I expected relief in his expression. Instead, something heavier settled there. "It is not that simple." "It is exactly that simple," I said. "You give it back. I go home. You stop following me to my school." His jaw tightened slightly. "You think I am following you because of a piece of fabric? Then explain it." Silence stretched between us. A bus passed behind him, tires hissing through a shallow puddle. A parent called a child's name across the parking lot. Life continued in fragments around the edge of something neither of us had named yet. "The name on that grave," Adrian said finally, "was not only connected to you." My chest tightened before I could stop it. "Eleanor Whitaker?" "Yes. She was a teacher. A mother. She raised me." "That is what you believe." The way he said it was not cruel. That was what made it worse. I felt something cold move through my thoughts, not fear exactly, but the beginning of doubt forming a shape I did not want to look at. "You do not know her," I said, more firmly than I felt. "I know her name appears in records that were sealed for a reason." My breath caught. "What records?" Adrian did not answer immediately. Instead, he looked past me toward the school building, as if measuring distance, exits, patterns I could not see. "You should not be here alone," he said. "Do not change the subject." "This is not a subject," he replied. "It is a history that was never meant to resurface." I took a step closer before I realized I was moving. "Stop speaking in circles." His eyes returned to mine, steady again, controlled again, but not entirely closed. "Then ask yourself why a woman like Eleanor Whitaker raised you and never told you where you came from." The question landed harder than anything he had said so far, because it was not his question. It was one I had avoided my entire life. I felt the weight of it press against my ribs, sharp and familiar. Before I could respond, a car door opened nearby. Not his. Not mine. Just a passing interruption in a moment that suddenly felt too fragile to remain unbroken. I looked away instinctively, and when I turned back, Adrian had not moved, but the distance between us felt different, like something had shifted without permission. "I am going home," I said quietly. "I know," he replied. "And you are not following me," I added. For a second I thought he might argue. Instead he nodded once. "Not today," he said. The words should have reassured me. They did not. Because as I walked away toward the bus stop, I understood something I had not wanted to admit at the grave or outside the cemetery gate or standing in front of my school. Whatever truth was buried with Eleanor Whitaker, it was no longer staying buried, and Adrian Moretti was not the cause of it. He was simply the first person who had been close enough to see it begin to surface. I told myself I would stop looking over my shoulder on the walk home, but by the time I reached the bus stop on Massachusetts Avenue, the habit had already returned, quiet and automatic like breathing. The streetlights had come on early because the sky could not decide whether it was evening or something heavier. My reflection in the bus shelter glass looked unfamiliar, slightly washed out, as if the city had started erasing me piece by piece without asking permission. I kept thinking about Adrian Moretti standing outside my school, about the way he had said Eleanor Whitaker's name like it belonged in a place I had never been allowed to see. The bus arrived late, and I sat near the window watching Boston slide past in wet fragments of light and shadow. Every stop felt louder than it should have been. Every stranger on board felt too aware of their own lives to notice mine unraveling quietly in the background. By the time I reached my apartment, the doubt he had left behind had grown heavier than my bag. My building was old, brick-faced, with narrow stairs that creaked in familiar ways. I climbed them slowly, keys already in my hand, only to stop halfway up when I saw something waiting on my doormat. A small envelope. Plain. No stamp. No return address. My name written across the front in careful, controlled handwriting I did not recognize immediately but somehow already associated with control itself. Adrian Moretti. I stood still for a long moment, listening to the building breathe around me, then picked it up with fingers that suddenly felt colder than the hallway air. Inside was a single photograph. It was old, slightly faded, edges worn as if it had been handled too many times and then hidden away. 3 people stood in the image. A younger Eleanor Whitaker, smiling faintly but not fully at the camera. A woman I did not recognize standing beside her, holding a newborn wrapped in a pale blanket. And behind them, just slightly out of focus, a man I knew without being told. The same structure of face. The same controlled stillness in the eyes. Adrian's family line, captured in a moment that did not belong to me, but suddenly felt like it had been waiting for me all along. My throat tightened as I stepped into my apartment and closed the door behind me. The silence inside was sharper than usual. I sat down at my small kitchen table, the photograph still in my hand, and tried to understand why a stranger from a cemetery now had something that looked like it had been stolen from the past I never questioned. My phone vibrated once on the table, breaking the stillness. Unknown number. I hesitated only briefly before answering, because fear and curiosity were beginning to sound exactly the same inside me. Do not ignore this, his voice said through the speaker. Calm, measured, familiar in a way that unsettled me more than I wanted to admit. Where did you get this? I asked, looking at the photograph again. From a place your guardian thought was forgotten, Adrian replied. I stood up without realizing it, walking toward the window as if distance might change the meaning of his words. Eleanor would never hide something like this from me, I said. She hid you from it, he corrected gently. There is a difference. My fingers tightened around the phone. You do not get to decide what she did or did not do. No, he said after a pause. But the people who signed that photograph already did. I looked down again at the image. The baby. At Eleanor's faint smile. At the truth I had never been offered a name for. Why are you doing this? I asked, my voice quieter now. There was a long silence on the other end, long enough that I thought he might have ended the call without telling me. When he spoke again, something in his tone had shifted, just slightly, as if the control he always held had cracked just enough to let something older through. Because every Sunday, he said, you were not visiting a grave. Another pause. You were visiting the beginning of a story I was never allowed to finish. The call ended before I could respond. I stood in my apartment with the photograph still in my hand, understanding for the first time that Eleanor Whitaker had not simply raised me. She had placed me somewhere between 2 histories that were never supposed to meet, and Adrian Moretti had just found the edge where they were starting to collide. I did not sleep that night, not properly, not in the way sleep is supposed to happen when a mind is not being pulled apart thread by thread. The photograph stayed on my kitchen table under the soft glow of a single lamp, as if light alone could force it to reveal more than it already had. Every time I closed my eyes, I saw the same image again. Eleanor Whitaker smiling faintly beside a newborn, a woman I did not know standing close, and behind them the blurred outline of a man who now felt like he had been present in my life long before I ever met him. Morning came too quickly, gray and thin through my apartment windows. I went to work anyway because I did not know what else to do with a life that was suddenly no longer organized by certainty. My classroom was louder than usual that day, children talking over each other, crayons breaking, laughter spilling into corners of the room that I had always used to anchor myself. I wrote spelling words on the board, corrected small mistakes, tied loose shoelaces, all while feeling as if part of my attention was still sitting at my kitchen table staring at a past I had never been told I was connected to. By mid-morning I noticed him again. Not inside the school this time, not at the gate, but across the street where the buses slowed near the intersection. Adrian Moretti stood beneath a bare tree, dark coat unmoving in the wind, watching the building with the same quiet focus I had first seen at the cemetery. I felt my stomach tighten immediately. I turned away from the window, telling myself I was imagining it, but when I looked again 15 minutes later, he was still there. After school, I waited until the hallway was empty before stepping outside. The air was colder than the morning, sharper, carrying the faint smell of wet pavement and distant traffic. I did not have to look far to find him. He was already closer now, standing at the edge of the schoolyard as if he had never left. "You are not supposed to be here," I said as soon as I reached him. "I am not inside," he replied. "That is not the same thing. It is close enough for concern." I tightened my grip on my bag, frustration rising beneath the confusion that had been building since the photograph. "Why are you doing this?" I asked. "Following me, leaving things at my apartment, showing up at my school." His expression did not change, but there was something heavier behind his eyes now, something less controlled than before. "Because you are closer to the truth than anyone else has been in a long time," he said. I let out a short breath that was not quite a laugh. "That is not an answer. It is the only one I have." The wind moved between us, pushing fallen leaves along the sidewalk. A school bus pulled away in the distance, children pressing faces to windows without noticing what stood still in the cold outside. I took a step back, needing space more than explanation. "I saw the photograph," I said. "That changed something in him. Not dramatically, not visibly to anyone else. But I felt it in the silence that followed, like a door had closed somewhere behind his eyes." "Then you know it is not finished," he said. "I know nothing," I replied. "I know I grew up with a woman who told me I was loved. I know she is dead. And I know a man I met 3 times is trying to rewrite everything I believed about her." Adrian looked down briefly, then back up at me. "I am not rewriting her," he said. "I am trying to understand why she was in that photograph with my mother." The mention of his mother made the air feel thinner. I remembered the image again without wanting to. The baby. The woman. Eleanor's smile. "You think I have answers," I said quietly. "I think you have questions you were never allowed to ask," he corrected. The honesty in that sentence made something inside me shift because it was uncomfortably accurate. For years, I had stopped asking questions about Eleanor Whitaker because she had always looked at me with a kind of sadness that made questions feel like cruelty. I had accepted silence as protection. Now silence was starting to feel like a locked room I had been living inside without realizing it. I stepped closer without thinking. "If you know something, just say it," I said. "Stop doing this in pieces." Adrian studied me for a long moment, as if deciding how much truth I could safely hold. "Eleanor Whitaker did not simply raise you," he said finally. "She hid you." The words landed heavily between us, not as accusation, but as fact he had carried too long. I felt my hands go cold. "From what?" I asked, though part of me already feared the answer was not something simple like danger or distance or circumstance. Adrian's gaze moved briefly toward the school, then back to me. "From a name," he said. "And from a family that has been looking for that name for a very long time." I stood still on the sidewalk, my breath visible in the cold air, realizing for the first time that the grave I visited every week was not just a place of mourning. It was a marker on a map I had never known I was part of, and Adrian Moretti was not the one who had started following me. He was the one who had finally arrived at the place where the truth had been waiting. I did not realize how quickly silence could become heavier than words until I stood on the sidewalk outside the school and watched Adrian Moretti stop speaking as if he had already said too much. The cold air between us felt tighter than it should have, as if the city itself was listening for something neither of us had fully named yet. Children's voices faded behind the school doors, replaced by the distant hum of traffic and the soft rustle of wind moving through bare branches. I kept my distance from him, not because I trusted him, but because I did not trust what standing too close might reveal. "A name," I repeated slowly. "You said I was hidden from a name." Adrian's gaze did not leave mine. Yes. That is not an explanation. It is the beginning of one. I exhaled sharply, frustration breaking through the fear I had been trying to contain since the photograph. Do you understand how impossible this sounds? I asked. You show up at a cemetery, you follow me to my school, you leave photographs in my apartment, and now you are telling me my entire life is connected to a name I do not even know. For the first time, something in his expression shifted, not into defensiveness, but into something quieter. I am not trying to disturb your life, he said. It was already disturbed before I found it. The words hit differently than I expected, not because they were kind, but because they did not sound like manipulation. They sounded like observation. I tightened my grip on my bag strap. If this is about Eleanor, then say it clearly, I said. Why would she hide me from anyone? Adrian looked away for a brief moment, toward the empty street beyond the school gates, as if measuring how much truth could safely exist in daylight. Because the name you were born with is connected to mine, he said finally. My breath stopped for half a second. The world did not change, but something inside me did. That is not possible, I said immediately, though my voice no longer carried certainty. I know who I am. Do you? He asked softly. That question was worse than accusation. It was permission for doubt. I took a step back without meaning to, my shoes scraping against the pavement. You are saying I am part of your family, I said. I am saying Eleanor Whitaker placed you outside of it, Adrian replied. For reasons I do not fully understand yet. The wind picked up again, pressing against my coat, slipping cold between my thoughts. I tried to focus on facts, on anything stable. My classroom. My students. The way Eleanor used to hum while cooking. The way she never spoke about her past beyond careful fragments. If this is true, I said slowly, then why now? Adrian's answer came without hesitation. Because someone else has started asking the same questions I am asking, he said. And they are not doing it gently. A silence followed that felt heavier than the first. I studied his face, looking for cracks that would turn this into a misunderstanding, a coincidence, anything simpler than what it was becoming. Who? I asked. That is not a name I can give you yet, he said. My frustration sharpened again. So I am supposed to just trust you? For the first time, something almost like hesitation crossed his expression. Not weakness. Calculation. No, he said. You are not supposed to trust me. That answer startled me more than anything else he had said. I blinked. Then why are you here? Adrian looked at me directly, and this time there was no distance in his gaze, only something steady and uncomfortably honest. Because you are standing in the middle of something that was never meant to be forgotten, he said. And if I walk away now, you will not have time to understand it before it reaches you. The school doors opened behind me, laughter spilling out as children were released for the day, their voices cutting through the tension like ordinary life refusing to notice extraordinary things. I turned briefly toward the sound, then back to him. I am not part of your world, I said quietly. Adrian's expression softened just slightly, not into comfort, but into recognition. You already are, he replied. And for the first time since I began visiting Eleanor Whitaker's grave every Sunday, I understood that the question was no longer why he was watching me. The question was what had been watching me long before he ever arrived. I did not realize how quickly truth could stop feeling like information and start feeling like impact until I stood alone after Adrian Moretti's words dissolved into the noise of children leaving school. You already are. Those were the last things he said, and they stayed behind longer than his presence, echoing in a way that made ordinary sounds feel slightly unreal. The schoolyard emptied slowly, backpacks bouncing, parents calling names, a normal world continuing without awareness that something beneath it had shifted. I stayed still near the gate, my hand gripping the strap of my bag until my fingers ached, trying to decide whether fear or disbelief was the more reasonable response. Neither felt complete. Both felt too small. When I finally looked up again, the street where Adrian had stood was empty. No black car. No silhouette under the bare tree. Only wet pavement reflecting gray sky and the quiet suggestion that nothing had happened at all. But something had. I walked home differently that day. Not faster. Not slower. Just aware of distance in a way I had not been before, as if every block between the school and my apartment now contained questions instead of space. My building looked the same when I arrived, brick and familiar, the kind of place that never changed even when everything inside it did. I climbed the stairs carefully, pausing at each landing without knowing why, until I reached my door and noticed it was slightly ajar. My breath caught immediately. I had locked it that morning. I always locked it. I pushed it open slowly, expecting disorder, expecting violation, expecting something I could name. But instead I found stillness. And in the middle of that stillness, sitting on my kitchen table, was an envelope. The same kind I had received before. Plain. No return address. My name written in that same controlled handwriting. This time there was no hesitation. I opened it immediately. Inside was not a photograph but a single sheet of paper. Copy. Of a record. Faded at the edges, official in format, stamped with dates I did not immediately understand. At the top was a name. Not mine. Not Eleanor Whitaker. A different name entirely, repeated in legal language that suggested birth records, custody transfer, and sealed documentation. My knees weakened slightly before I even finished reading the first paragraph. I sat down at the table without realizing I had moved. The apartment felt smaller suddenly, as if the walls had shifted inward to listen. The document described an arrangement made decades ago, involving guardianship, relocation, and the removal of a child from one recorded identity into another. My eyes moved over the words again and again, refusing to let them settle into meaning. There was a signature at the bottom. Not Eleanor Whitaker's. Someone else. Someone connected to the Moretti name. My hands began to shake only after I had read it 3 times. I pressed the paper flat against the table as if pressure could restore order. My mind reached instinctively for Eleanor. For her voice. For the way she used to hum while cooking, the way she used to say my name like it belonged safely in her mouth. But every memory now felt slightly displaced, like furniture moved in a room while I was asleep. My phone rang, breaking the silence so sharply I nearly dropped it. Unknown number again. I did not want to answer it. I did anyway. You saw it, Adrian's voice said immediately. No greeting. No distance. Just certainty. I looked down at the paper again, as if speaking about it might make it less real. What is this? I asked. A record, he replied. Of what? A pause followed, longer than before. Of how you were removed from your original identity, he said. The words did not feel like they belonged in conversation. They felt like they belonged in courtrooms or sealed rooms or places I had never been allowed to enter. That is not true, I said, but the protest lacks strength. Eleanor would never. Eleanor did not act alone, Adrian interrupted quietly. I closed my eyes for a moment, but the paper stayed behind them. Then who did? I asked. Another pause. This one heavier. When he spoke again, his voice had changed slightly, not softer but more precise. Someone who still exists, he said. And someone who does not want you remembering what you were before she found you. I opened my eyes again, staring at the document as if it might rewrite itself under observation. Why are you telling me this? I asked. Because you are no longer just connected to it, Adrian said. You are inside it. The call ended before I could respond. The silence returned immediately, but it was no longer empty. It was structured now, defined, like a shape forming around something I could no longer avoid seeing. I sat at my kitchen table long after the screen of my phone went dark, the official record still in front of me, understanding slowly and unwillingly that the grave I had visited every Sunday was no longer the center of my questions. It was the edge of them. And whatever Adrian Moretti had just shown me was only the beginning of what had been buried around it. I did not move for a long time after the call ended, because movement felt like it belonged to a version of me that still believed the world had clear edges. The document lay flat on my kitchen table, heavy in a way paper should not be, as if ink alone could carry the weight of decisions made before I was old enough to speak my own name. My apartment was silent except for the faint hum of the refrigerator, a sound I had never paid attention to before but now felt almost deliberate, like something trying to remind me that ordinary life still existed somewhere outside the paper in front of me. I read the top line again, then the next, then stopped reading entirely because understanding no longer required repetition. It was already inside me. The name that was not mine. The signatures that were not Eleanor Whitaker's. the language that spoke of transfer, custody, removal, as if a life could be relocated the way furniture is moved from one room to another. I pressed my palms against the table and tried to steady my breathing, but every inhale felt slightly delayed, like my body was reacting to a truth my mind had not fully accepted yet. When I finally stood up, I did not know where I was going until I was already putting on my coat. The city outside my building looked unchanged, but I no longer trusted unchanged things. I took the train without deciding to, sat without remembering sitting down, and found myself walking through the familiar paths toward Mount Auburn Cemetery as if my body had already chosen the answer my mind refused to form. The gates were the same. The trees were the same. But the grave felt different now, not like an ending point, but like a marker placed deliberately between what I was told and what I was not allowed to see. Eleanor Whitaker's name waited under the gray sky as it always had, but this time I did not kneel immediately. I stood above it, holding the edges of my coat closed against the wind, feeling something shift behind me before I turned. Adrian Moretti was there again, but not as a shadow this time. He stood openly, as if waiting had become something he no longer needed to hide. "You read it," he said quietly. It was not a question. I nodded once. "It does not make sense," I said. "It does," he replied. "If you accept that your life did not begin where you were told it began." I looked down at the stone between us, at Eleanor's name carved into permanence that suddenly felt less like certainty and more like protection. "She loved me," I said, and my voice broke slightly on the last word because it was the only thing I still felt sure of. Adrian did not challenge it. Instead, he stepped closer to the grave, careful not to cross into my space. "I believe she did," he said. That answer surprised me more than doubt would have. "Then why?" I asked. "Why hide me? Why rewrite everything?" He looked at the stone for a long moment before answering, and when he did, his voice was lower, less controlled than before. "Because the name on that document is not just a record," he said. "It is a warning." My chest tightened. A warning from who? Adrian hesitated, and in that hesitation I saw something I had not seen in him before. Not power. Not control. Responsibility. "From the people who believed you should not exist under your original name," he said. The wind moved through the cemetery again, and suddenly the distance between past and present felt thinner than air. I stared at him, searching for exaggeration, for manipulation, for anything that would allow me to reject what he was saying. But there was nothing theatrical in his expression, only the weight of something carried too long alone. "So what happens now?" I asked finally. Adrian's gaze shifted from the grave back to me, steady but no longer distant. "Now you decide," he said. "Whether you stay the person Eleanor Whitaker built you to be, or you follow the truth back to where it started." The words did not feel like an ending. They felt like a threshold. I looked at Eleanor's name one last time, then at the document still folded inside my coat pocket, and understood that every version of my life had led to this exact silence between two names I did not fully understand yet. When I finally spoke, my voice was quieter than I expected, but steady enough to surprise me. "I need to know everything," I said. Adrian nodded once, as if he had been waiting for nothing else. And standing there between a grave that had held my past and a man who had just revealed its fracture, I understood that I was no longer visiting the dead for answers. I was about to meet the living who had buried them.